Jai Gurudev, everybody. Welcome to a special session on this special day of beginning of Navaratri. We want to focus on focus, actually. That's the topic of today. Guruji, earlier this year in January, he mentioned the theme in a spectacular kind of way in Mauritius when he introduced a formula that makes it easier for us to focus on focus. It's kind of like one of those themes that often we talk about when it comes to spirituality. Focus your mind, stay focused. It's something that we seem to struggle with, and we have to keep coming back, and we are somehow suffering from collective dementia. So we have to be reminded again and again and again, and always bring our mind back to the middle, to the center point. And so it's one of those ideas, notions that we think we understand, that we think we are familiar with, but we seem to struggle. So this formula that Guruji gave, we're going to highlight today. We're going to expand a little bit because it's going to help us to focus more, and it's going to help us to remember why it is so important to focus and how to focus. Hopefully, you'll get something out of this as we zoom in, basically, on the one hand, into what Guruji said, and on the other hand, we sort of expand so that we get a better grip even on what Guruji was conveying through giving us that formula. And I want to start with the kind of another ultimate formula to focus, and I'll begin the talk with this, and I will end it with this. Another formula that we're very familiar with, which is just love. We use it, meanwhile, in Bhakti Marga as the slogan for the entire mission, and there are good reasons for that. It's very, very simple. It's just 2 words, very profound, but so much is in it. Like the entirety of who we are, where we want to go, where we belong, all is in these 2 words. And the hard diamond that you see now is sort of this, it's a symbol of, well, love, of course, the heart, and density, like a diamond that is this dense matter that is indestructible, that can also symbolize that focus on what truly matters, which is love. And love is another way of saying God, because God is love. So I placed him into the middle of that heart because he is also in our heart. That's one of the key things we need to understand about the truth, about who we are and what we need to focus on. So I've created this little, let's say, symbol for us alongside with the notion of just love. What is focus? Let's talk a little bit about that before we enter into the formula that Guruji gave. You see on the right hand side, you see Nandi, the bull that is always focused on Shiva. We wanted to originally give this talk on Shivaratri, so now we've moved it to Navaratri. Both festivals are very much connected to focus. On Shivaratri, Shiva, who is the embodiment of focus, he's always focused on the Lord. He is the Lord himself, an aspect of the Lord, but always focusing on the Lord. He always chants Ram. He's always meditating on the Lord. And Nandi, his vehicle, is equally like a focus because he's focusing on Shiva himself all the time. So that's why I've chosen Nandi as another symbol of focus. One possible definition of what focus is, there's of course many ways we can define focus, is the act of directing one's attention, energy, or resources towards a particular object, activity, or goal. There are a few key points in here. There's direction, that implies a will. It's not random. Attention or energy, like putting all we've got into one direction. And that direction implies that we need to have a goal. Very, very important if we talk about focus. There is no focus if there is no goal. And we'll expand on that in a moment. Furthermore, it implies concentration. It's another key word that keeps coming up when we talk about focus. Clarity, also extremely important. It goes along, it goes almost without saying. You can't be focused if you're not clear. And determination, again, another way of saying there has to be a will. There has to be also action. We can't look at the topic of focus without action, moving in a certain direction. And so to close this definition, in achieving a desired outcome. Again, it goes towards a goal. Since we are on today's day of Navaratri, the first day, which is dedicated to Shailaputri Devi. So as you know, throughout the 9 days of Navaratri, each day is dedicated to a different aspect of Divine Mother. And Shailaputri, Shaila is mountain, she's the daughter of the mountain. She's associated with the Muladhara chakra, the beginning chakra on our journey upward as we rise in consciousness. So she forms the foundation of our spiritual path. We want to build it on a rock. And the next day, tomorrow, Brahmacharini Devi is also very much associated with the topic of focus. She's very, let's say, disciplined. She repeats the divine name. She's depicted with a mala in her hand. So you can see over and over again throughout these festivals that we are celebrating and throughout the different aspects of the divine, it always keeps coming back to that dedication and to that focus. If we want to rise, if we want to reach the goal, if we want to reach unity with God, there's no other way. So let's look at this formula that Guruji gave in January of 2023, because, as Guruji often points out, we are very forgetful. So even this formula, unless we highlight it as we do now, it might easily get forgotten. There's so many treasures that Guruji is giving us over and over again, and we need to sort of receive them with, like the way we receive prasad, not letting it drop, not letting it fall away and drop into oblivion. So the first letter in this formula, because Guruji just took the term focus and broke it down into its 5 letters and associated a meaning with each of these 5 letters. And the first letter, F, he connected with fun. Kind of surprising maybe to some, but very important to highlight. And I'm personally very happy that he did, because so often we may forget to have fun. Let's say joy drops out of the equation as we get over serious about life and also about the spiritual path. There is a time to be serious, of course. There is that as well. But unless we can find joy and unless we have some fun, it's going to be difficult to stay on the path, to keep going, to find that motivation to move forward. So it's refreshing to hear that it's not only okay, it's almost like a must. You have to enjoy your path one way or the other. It doesn't mean that we're going to enjoy it all the time. There are challenging moments where we don't feel like having joy, but it's like a nice reminder that it's perfectly permissible to have fun on the path. It's really important. And Guruji, when he talked about it, he highlighted that, when we go to prayers, for example, when we perform all our different spiritual practices, kirtan, puja, your meditation, enjoy those moments. Try to cultivate enjoying it. And for each person, this is different. So there's that secret of devotion, let's say, that Shiva is talking about also, which for each one, we have to discover what works for us. This is an individual formula that we have to come up with. So I've personally, like digging into this topic of focus, I've actually enjoyed doing that, to tell you the truth, because what goes with fun, and this was already sort of mentioned earlier, is having a goal. Like when you have a purpose, when you have a goal, then joy comes up. Like you know why you're doing things. It gives you a fulfillment, a sense of fulfillment. And so I connect the subject of fun with the subject of having a goal, a clear goal. Guruji, to quote him, has said, "Set a goal in your life. Whatever you determine and focus on, you will reach. Even if it takes many years, you will reach it. Stop worrying about the future. If you want to have a better future, it all depends on you. Don't bother about the past. The past is finished. Leave it behind. As long as you hang on to the past will hang on to you. The more you let go of the past, the more you are in the present, and the more you are free." Free is also starting with F, kind of a reminder that when we focus and we have fun and we have a purpose, that is the path to freedom. And maybe important to mention in this context is that this is kind of the irony on the spiritual path, and Krishna talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita, that when he speaks about happiness and the sattvic form of happiness, is that, and this is an indication of what happens along the way, he's saying that it starts like poison and ends up like nectar. So if we experience difficulties on our spiritual path, hardship, something that feels like poison, it's perfectly normal, because we undergo a purification, especially in the beginning, as we have a lot to sort of purify and get rid of. And that is not easy, but it gets better along the way as we become lighter, as we've started to invest into our goal, and we start to benefit from our investment. And so things become easier and lighter, and we start more and more to taste that nectar that Krishna is talking about. Then we have, as another symbol of this goal of that is so important when we talk about focus and the purpose, the fulfillment of our life as such. I've taken also the Sri Yantra that you can see on this slide, because it has this center point. It's very, very tiny and you can hardly see it. Not sure how well you can see it now on your screen, but the center of the Sri Yantra, this is called the Bindu. It's this one single point that's what we need to focus on. It's that very symbol of where our focus should be. We know that from that Bindu, which is symbolizing God himself, the rest is like his creation. All comes from that single point, all comes from God, and it has many facets, and it's a wonderful creation, but we can get lost in it. And so we have to come back always and concentrate. The term concentration implies that there is a center point. Come back to that center point. We have received life from that center. All of us. We are the source. We are a child of that source, and we venture out into the world. But the purpose of life is to return home, to return to the source, and that happens through sacrifice, which is a term that we don't always like to hear because we associate it with something like a loss. But in reality, it is just simply giving back what has been given to us. That's sort of the cycle of life. We are asked to return that, and that is actually going to give us the fulfillment. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that any other action other than done in the spirit of sacrifice leads to bondage. So whenever we don't act in that spirit of giving back, it leads us away, and it leads us actually into suffering. So it's not through taking that we find fulfillment, but it is through giving and going back into this center point. I remember personally when I first met Guruji that, because prior to that, I had already decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to the service of humanity. That was clear to me. And when I met Guruji, I extended that. I realized that the best way that I can serve humanity is by serving him. Later on, I realized that how these two were connected. There's the saying, Manas Seva, Madhav Seva. So serving humanity is serving Madhav, another name for Krishna. So when we go into this spirit of service, whether we know it or not, whether we realize it or not, it will bring us back to God, because serving his creation is serving God. And when we start to serve God, we inevitably return home. So that's probably what happened in my life. Why I'm here now is because I started to turn in my mind from taking back to giving. And then step by step, God came closer into my life. There is a passage very early on in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I wanted to highlight also because it fits very much with the topic of focus. It goes like this. Vasudeva Paraveda Vasudeva Paramakaha, Vasudeva Para Yoga, Vasudeva Para Kriyaha, Vasudeva Param Jnanam, Vasudeva Param Tapaha, Vasudeva Paro Dharmo, Vasudeva Paragati. Essentially, like you hear Vasudeva repeated over and over again, which is another name for the Lord. Sorry. And throughout this verse, or two verses, it says always that the goal of the Vedas, for example, the first line, the goal of yoga, the third line, kriya, fourth line, jnanam, knowledge, tapas, all is for the purpose of realizing the Lord. Everything leads back to Him. He's the goal of our life, nothing else. And looking back also at my encounter with Guruji early on, this is now 25 years ago, he told me, I want you to go directly to God. I want you to connect directly with God. Something that often we don't hear. You know, we are sort of asked to go indirectly and to go through mediators. So we all have the right, we all are the children of God, and we can connect directly with God. But for that, we have to be clear that He's our goal. In this slide, you can see that through the image on the right, what Guruji is saying is another quote of his: a sadhaka and bhakta, a devotee, should have their mind focused on the feet of the Master. They should see their Guru sitting inside of them. They should not let the mind run around. You see the tilak that Panduranga Vittal is wearing. He actually has Shiva, the Shiva Lingam, as his tilak. And we have the feet of the Lord as our tilak. Both are thinking about each other, are focused on each other. We are focused on the Lord, and the Lord is focused on His devotee. Shiva symbolizing the devotee in this instance. So, again, another angle to remind us of where our focus should be. The feet of the Master, with the understanding that the Master is no different from the Lord Himself. It is the Lord who has taken on the form of the Master to bring us back to Himself. And so, maybe you remember last year I gave 2 talks. One was about the meaning of life, and one was about our Haribhakta Sampradaya Siddhanta. And I used some of those slides again in this presentation because they all revolve around the same essential topic of what is the essence of life. This was about, one talk was about the meaning of life, and the Siddhanta, the conclusion of the teaching of Guruji, that was the other talk. They all revolve around what is our focus? What is our goal? So I've used this slide again here, where you see the Atma, ourselves, the soul on the left, still in the material reality, in the limited reality, walking towards the Paramatma, the Lord, representing the spiritual reality which is unlimited. Along the way, like, we have to have focus to reach there and have fun. Remember, we're still in the fun section now of the formula focus. And you can see the boat on which we are traveling, and it's the guru that takes us across that ocean, let's say, of samsara, the ocean of the material dimension that we need to cross to reach from the limited to the unlimited. And when we do that, then that gap that we have initially, that distance where we have forgotten about God, where we know deep down, we feel that life is not full, we are not finding that happiness that is rightly ours, that is who we are, it disappears. But for that, we have to take these steps and we have to focus. Important in this context is also, as was mentioned earlier in the Bhagavatam verse, is knowledge also. Sarve Veda Yat Pada Mam Mananti. This is a small section of the Katha Upanishad, and I'll quote it first and then I'll give you the context. Yama said to Nachiketa, the goal which all the Vedas declare, which all austerities aim at, and which men desire when they lead the life of continence, brahmacharya, I will tell you briefly, it is Om. So to understand, this is Yama, the Lord of Death, speaking to Nachiketa, a young boy of age about 16. And he's expressing this in a certain moment. For you to better understand, I'll give you the story, which is a beautiful story, actually, very insightful. Nachiketa's father was a well-known, wealthy person, and he wanted to do a great sacrifice. He wanted to give everything away for presumably spiritual realization. And there were lots of guests there, like at this sacrificial ceremony, as he was giving everything, all his material possessions, including many cows. And Nachiketa was observing the offering, but he saw also many of the cows were old and not in good shape anymore. And he felt he wanted his father to succeed with the sacrifice. So he felt that there's something not quite right, there's not something not complete. And then he thought, but I belong also to my father, so maybe he can offer me as well to give really the best of himself for reaching his aim. And so he was nagging his father, saying, what about me? I belong to you. Why aren't you offering me? And first his father was ignoring him, but he was persistent, which is another interesting quality, that determination that we need to have also on the spiritual path, to the point where his father got annoyed, and out of anger he said, I'll offer you to Yama, Lord Yama. But he didn't really mean that. It was just out of irritation. But his son took his father by the word, said, okay, I'll go to Yama, to death. And his father was very regretful. He said, no, I don't want you to go. But his son insisted and said, well, we are, in our tradition, when we say something, we mean it and we follow through on it. So we have to honor our word. So with a heavy heart, his father let him go, and his son went to the abode of Yama, to the abode of death. And when he reached there, Yama was absent. He was somewhere traveling, I guess, picking up a few souls. So he was waiting for 3 days and 3 nights, not drinking anything, not eating anything, just waiting for Yama to come. When Yama returned, he saw this young Brahmin boy, and he was felt very sorry that he did not take care of him as a guest. And to compensate for that, he said, I'll grant you 3 wishes, 3 boons. Nachiketa's first request was, please give my father peace of mind, which Lord Yama was very happy to grant. Also liked the fact that Nachiketa was not asking anything for himself. The second request he made was, again, not for himself. He said, please, like, how can other people find happiness? And so Yama gave a special sacrifice method for people to reach happiness. And then Nachiketa's final request was, what happens after death? And this was unexpected for Yama. Nobody asked him that ever before. And he tried to dissuade Nachiketa from that. He offered him material things. And like, I can't really answer that. That's a mystery. Not even the gods know about it. Let's not go there. But Nachiketa, again, was very persistent. And secretly, Yamaraj was happy to see that Nachiketa was focused on that. He didn't care about material benefits, gains. Nothing could distract him from the aim. And so it was then that Yamaraj gave him the secret knowledge about the self and how to realize the self. And as a result, Nachiketa realized himself and ultimately realized the Lord. So it's a beautiful story, again, that inspires us to stay focused. He mentions also in this passage brahmacharya, which it's an interesting term also along the way. Some of us are brahmacharis, but it's not just about somebody who's become a brahmachari or a brahmacharini, but ultimately we're all asked, whether we are householders or whether we are brahmacharis, nuns and monks, we are all asked to be brahmacharis in the sense of, if we analyze the term, Brahma, the Lord, and achari is to constantly move towards the Lord. Again, it has to do with direction, staying focused, having a clear goal, knowing where you go, and keep going, that persistence. Then we can't not talk about this shortly, the story of Arjuna and Dronacharya and the other Pandavas when they had the lesson when they were younger, the Pandavas as children, and also the Kauravas, and they were asked to shoot an arrow. And before shooting the arrow, Dronacharya asked each of the disciples, like, what do you see? And the only one who was utmost focused, who kept his vision only on the eye of the bird, nothing else, a wooden bird, not a real bird, but that they had to shoot the arrow on. He was the only one, Arjuna, who didn't look at the surroundings. When he was asked by his teacher, what do you see? He said, I see only the eye of the bird, nothing else. That single pointed focus. This is a famous story that goes along with this topic. And I've chosen the verse from the Bhagavad Gita alongside, which is one of the key verses of the Bhagavad Gita. And very recently, Guruji also highlighted this verse. It's the verse just before one of the initiation verses in our tradition, chapter 18, verse 66, to also include this verse as for our daily sadhana, to repeat this verse on a daily basis. It's so crucial, and it's says, focus your mind on me. Focus your mind on me. Can't be repeated often enough. In fact, Krishna repeats it already earlier. He says it in chapter 9, verse 34, almost the identical verse. The first two lines are identical with this verse, which is very rare. That shows that when he repeats himself in that way, he's really highlighting something very profound, essential for us not to forget. It's so important. If we can just remember this verse, that would be amazing. And then implement it, obviously. So focus your mind on me, be devoted to me, worship me, prostrate before me, and you shall come to me alone. I promise you this verily, for you are dear to me. In chapter 9, verse 34, he also says, holding me as a supreme goal. Again, we see we have to have this understanding, what is our goal? And when we have that goal and we move towards that goal, we have fun. It's very fulfilling to feel that you are going in the right direction. Guruji also, since we have this image now of Arjuna shooting at the bird, he reminded us in various occasions that the image of the Lord should be our focus. So when we chant his name, but it's also very beneficial to have an image of him. When we close our eyes, we should think of him, like immediately his image should appear. And Guruji has said that this sounds easy, but it is not. But we're still called and invited to do that. Keep, like we need for our mind, we need to have this reference point. We need to be able to direct it also with an image. So now, let's go to the next portion of the formula, the O of focus, which stands for organization. This is almost like an anticlimax to having fun, but actually it's very important. It goes hand in hand. Like, yes, have fun. And I tried to show you that it's connected also to having an aim. But if we are not organized, then we will struggle in fulfilling our aim, in reaching our aim. So being organized is very important with being focused. And that has to do with prioritizing our tasks and our responsibilities, because there's many, and we can get easily lost in what is important and what is not so important. Interestingly, in Sanskrit, the term manas, which means mind, means also heart. So we can see that there is the mind and heart go together. It's almost like, I would say the O part is more about the mind, and the F part is more about the heart. But we need to join them. They need to join forces. And when we are organized, we start to eliminate distractions one after the other, so that we can keep going in the right direction as outlined earlier. But for that, we have to do one thing at a time. And we have to have discrimination. To continue with this is another advice from Yamaraj to Nachiketa, the story that I mentioned to you earlier. He says, both the good and the pleasant present themselves to a man. The calm soul examines them well and discriminates. Yeah, he prefers the good to the pleasant. But the fool chooses the pleasant out of greed and avarice. So it's having this discrimination. This is connected to the topic of organization. We need to understand what is important and what is not important. And I would associate that also with the topic of obedience. Clearly listening, hearing what the Master is saying, what Guruji is telling us, what to prioritize and what not. If we don't listen properly, we will miss that, and then our discrimination will suffer. And often, we conveniently forget what the Master is telling us because it doesn't suit us. And so we miss out. One of the things I think we need to take on board here also is not to try to do too much, not to become greedy or overambitious. Because the moment we start to do too much, we get stressed and we lose that joy that we talked about earlier. So it's important to do one thing at a time. Stress comes when we're trying to do too many things. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "O Arjuna, on this path, the resolute mind is one-pointed, but the thoughts of the irresolute are many-branched and endless." When we have too many choices, it's difficult then to move forward. We become indecisive. And Guruji doesn't like indecisiveness, not because he's fine, like he doesn't mind for himself, but he doesn't like to see us suffer and not moving forward, basically. Because if we go in this, like, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go or should I stay? Like, we are moving in circles. We're not moving forward. Spiritually speaking, this is not good for us. It's actually better to make a mistake than to do nothing, than to just stay in one place. Because at least from making a mistake, we will learn something that will help us to move forward. So in some sense, it doesn't really matter so much what we do. If it's the right thing, great. If it's the wrong thing, also fine, because we will learn and we'll move forward. But if we are afraid to make a mistake, then we don't move anywhere. That's the worst thing for us. And speaking of priorities, I often mention something that I experienced earlier in my life. About 20 years ago, I had some back issue, and I went to a therapist who worked on my atlas vertebra, the highest vertebra on top of the spine. I think it's often called sacrocranial therapy in some countries. It's the therapist is just exercising some very subtle energy on that vertebra to bring it into an equilibrium, because before, like, there's an imbalance, and so, like, they measure the length of the legs, and so that one leg will be seemingly longer because there is that imbalance in the spine than the other leg. And so then he brings that vertebra into the right position, and then a healing process starts, and the rest of the spine starts to align. And after few sessions, can be very few sessions, one is again perfectly balanced. But it all starts with the top vertebra, the top priority, basically. That's what it symbolizes in this context. So when we have the top priority set right, the rest will follow. But if we mix up our priorities, if God is not our first priority, then the rest of our life becomes a mess, essentially. I've created this little visual here, again, reminding us about the center point and how to organize ourselves, not to get distracted. I don't know how well you can see it, but in the middle is obviously God. We are next to him there, represented through this lady. And there's different layers. The outer layer, let's say, represents the world with, you see ice cream, you see money, you see Miss Piggy. She's a funny reminder, especially for the men, of like getting distracted, let's say, into relationships out of a desire to find fulfillment. The pizza, food, similar. It's all our desires that we pursue in hope of finding fulfillment. And if we are not focused, if we don't know about our goal, if we don't know where to look, if we don't know what we want, basically, then we will get lost inevitably, because these desires or these distractions are alluring. They can seem very attractive, and we do get something out of them, but we will always like realize that it's nothing lasting. It's temporary, and it, in fact, often it leads us into a worse states of depression, states of addiction, and so on. And it's interesting that the majority of people, this is scientifically also been looked at, do not know what they want. They have not, it's said that only 5% of people have written down their goal of life. So you see, again, like it's a question of organization. We need to, it's not only having the goal, but it's also having a plan of how to reach that goal. The moment we know what we want, the moment the center point is clear, then you see, like you see the Lord in the middle of this chart, and you see smaller versions of himself across the different layers. The moment I know that it's him that I want, I will find him everywhere. This is the amazing thing about knowing what you want. It's very efficient also. If you look at, let's say, you can test this wherever you are. If you choose a particular color, orange or blue, and you just focus on that color in your room or in your environment, all of a sudden you will see that color that you have focused on, that you've chosen to focus on. But if you don't know what you want, then you will go from one color, symbolically speaking, to the next color and say, no, I don't want this color, no, I don't want that color. We often know what we don't want, but that's very tiring. You're going to go through color by color and, oh no, it's not this color, it's not that color. So you go through elimination, and this elimination process can be very tiring. Like you may have to eliminate 99 out of 100 choices to come to that one that you actually want. But we may not have enough time in this life itself to reach there. So it's dangerous also to do it that way. Much smarter, much wiser is to take a moment. I always give this advice to people based on also my own life experience. Take a short moment that actually doesn't need a lot of time. 3 days may be easily enough, but 3 days where you sort of isolate yourself and allow yourself to go within and ask yourself, what do I want? What do I truly want? And go into that inner dialogue so that you discover what you want. And then from then on, with that clarity in mind, you start to collect anything that helps you to get closer to your goal. This is very, very efficient. It's called a goal. But again, like having a goal. That's why football is so enjoyable, because there are goals involved. Why I mentioned football is because I used to like football a lot, and Guruji would tease me about it early on, saying that if I had the same dedication and focus on the spiritual path as I had on football, I would be realized by now. So it's an innocent little example, but where our focus is very, very important. And it's often little things in life, that make a big difference. So we'll get to that in a moment. Sorting things. So speaking of prioritization and organization, there is a wonderful analogy that you may have heard of that I wanted to also include into this presentation, which is about the rocks, pebbles, and sand in our life. The story essentially goes like this, that there is a teacher who is in front of his class, and he has an empty jar, and he puts stones in it, fills it up, and then asks the students whether it's full. And they say, yes, it is full. But then he adds pebbles, like smaller stones, let's say, into it, and asks them again, is it full? And it seems very full at that point, and they say yes again. They say, yes, it is full. And then he adds sand, and then he fills it completely. And through that analogy, he's showing to our soul that like this, there is, if you put it in this order, you can truly fill up and have a fulfilling life. But if you reverse the order, if you put the sand first, you may not have, and this is what you see in this picture here, which is the left side of the jar, where the sand was put first, then the stones, the rocks, may not fit anymore, because you've wasted too much time. This is a symbol of life and time, this jar, with the wrong priorities, with the little things, with the petty things in life, which is what the sand symbolizes. It's okay to have a little bit of sand in your life, but the sand should not be your first priority. So build your life on a rock, like Shailaputri Devi is also reminding us of, and the rock parts in your life, the really important things, ultimately, of course, especially God for us who are on the spiritual path, but also, family and friends and your health, important topics. Make sure that you prioritize those so that they don't fall short, because if they fall short, you miss reaching your aim. There is another story, often in this context, which I like to just briefly hint at it, which is the story of the man and the 4 wives that Guruji has often told also, where there's a man who has 4 wives, and he prioritizes 3 out of the 4 wives, and he ignores the 4th wife. But all the first 3 wives, they symbolize the body, material possessions, and friends and family, actually, in this context also. And the 4th wife that he ignores symbolizes the soul. And at the end of his life, when he's about to depart, all the first 3 wives are not ready to accompany him into death. Only the 4th wife, only the soul is ready. Obviously, it is him, as in essence, is willing to accompany him, but he neglected his soul throughout his life. So it's a powerful reminder. I encourage you, recommend you to look into this story when you find a moment, because it helps us to set the right priorities in life. So the soul should not be the 4th priority. It should be the first priority. Then the rest, including friends and family, can become meaningful. But if we prioritize friends and family over and above the soul, then friends and family will come and go. They are not permanent. Only the soul is. So you don't want to leave with that regret at the end of your life. Speaking of organization, also very important to highlight building a habit. Habits are essentially a construct of organization, like repetitive behavior that is constructive, right? And so there is a quote from a philosopher of ancient Greece that I've picked here, Heraclitus. He said, "Day by day, what you choose, what you think, and what you do is who you become." I'll repeat that because it's very a strong quote that I think we need to reflect on. Day by day, what you choose, what you think, and what you do is who you become. So what we become is the result of what we do, what we think day by day. And that's actually, life can be broken down into days. That's an organizational unit for us also to look into. If we want to organize our life, we can't organize the entire life. It's too much, but we can organize a day. And the little things that we do in each day, it's what we need to pay attention to, because it is these little things, often even we use the little finger as a symbol for that, that can make or break things if we don't pay attention, for good and for bad. It's little things that can build us and uplift us, but it can also be little things that drag us into the other direction. So we have to be very watchful. And I'd like to personally think of a perfect day. So it's like, as we perfect ourselves, we want to get closer and closer to that perfect day and then replicate that day. And the perfect day starts with the little habits right after we wake up. I'm not going to go into details. Guruji has given us many instructions over time that each one of us needs to look into, do a refresh with what mantras to chant in the morning, where to put your mind, and how to end your day. And it's not in some cases, it's a general instruction for everybody. And in some cases, it's also a bit of an individual formula that each one of us has for their life. But it's these little puzzle pieces together that form a day. And I think we need to constantly try to optimize, to perfectionate a day. And like that, we move up the ladder, as you can see in this slide. Also important in that context, I think what we need to include into our organization is a cultivation of Sangha, of association. Who do you surround yourself with? I would say that's part of the organization as well. We are fortunate, those of us who are part of Bhakti Marga, following Guruji's teachings and being part of his family, that we are just given a family that supports us. But we also need to give something into, like, engage with that family. The verse from chapter 10, verse 9 in the Bhagavad Gita says, Krishna talks to Arjuna and says, with their minds focused, again, you see the topic of focus, focused on me, and their lives centered upon me, they inspire one another. By always speaking of my glory, they derive bliss and contentment. So we can help each other to stay focused. This is the great benefit of a Sangha. it really, like, without a Sangha, it's much harder to stay focused. With the help of a Sangha, it becomes fairly easy. And finally, on the topic of organization, I want to just speak briefly about time and death. We heard about death earlier in the story of Nachiketa. And Sant Kabir says here, life is fragile. Like the clay on a potter's wheel, anything can happen at any moment. Focus on the aim of attaining the lotus feet of the Lord. There is no other aim. Remember what Nachiketa asked, what happens to a man after death? Time, because death, death is a natural organizational endpoint. It's a deadline. Like, we even use the term deadline when we work on projects, when we have a goal that we need to achieve by a certain time. Time and death is the ultimate sort of endpoint in time, as far as we can say. It is a natural finishing line. We have to finish something by a certain point in time. And that is not a bad thing, actually. We're all encouraged to become friends with death, not to see death as an enemy. Without death, life would actually be shallow and meaningless somehow. So, and time, or timelines and deadlines are very helpful. If I didn't have a timeline or a deadline to do this presentation, it would have been a never-ending story. Like, it would have dragged out. So it's healthy and beneficial to have not endless time. But how we invest that time, that is critical. We're kind of encouraged to invest it into love, not into things, in short. There is a nice sutra from the Narada Bhakti Sutras which says, patiently waiting until one is able to give up material happiness, distress, desire, greed, and so on, one should not waste even half a second. Very interesting sutra, like patiently not wasting even half a second. It's sort of the paradox of life, like about time. We have some time, but don't waste time. But also be patient, which suggests not to stress, not to, to have faith and to take step by step, like we discussed earlier. Guruji recently also in Mauritius said, without an aim, we will stand at the end of life in front of Yamaraj and he will say, it's time to go. So we don't want to stand in front of death and feeling like, oh, I didn't finish what I've come here to do. Character. This is the middle letter of the formula focus. It's about attitude, about how we look at life. Heraclitus also said, the content of your character is your choice. Day by day, what you choose, what you think, and what you do is who you become. Remember, we said that. So, and he said also, a man's character is his fate. So character has something to do with choosing also, with choice, with being consistent, another C, with like walking the talk. It has to do with cultivating that sincerity of being true to our values, true to our aim, and true to our promise, true to our commitment. Another word that starts with C. All this goes together. It's being consequential It's all the words that start with C. Continuously. And have confidence also. And like I said, courage. I feel that it's very important to have that courage on the spiritual path. Guruji often highlighted the importance of loyalty. Like if we are not true to our word, if we're not consistent, if we are not really sincere, then things become difficult. Then things become corrupt, actually. That's even another word that starts with C. So character versus corrupt. Like, do we walk the talk? Yes or no? What is the enemy of focus? Well, the Bhagavad Gita is giving us a clue in the second chapter. It's just an extract from that verse 44. Those who cling to pleasure and power. Those who cling to pleasure and power cannot develop the resolute will of a concentrated mind. I've just chosen, you see a little symbol on the right, the veil, the spear of Muruga, another symbol of focus that Guruji has pointed out. Muruga is the son of Durga, so of Devi that we are celebrating today. That we have, if pleasure and power are in opposition to that focus, to that goal that we talked about earlier. There's a beautiful story in this context of Sant Eknath, who many of us are familiar, to some degree at least, because we're mentioning him at the end of our prayers, together with Eknath, Namdev, Eknath, and Tukaram. So he's one of the great Varkari saints. And there's a beautiful little episode from his life in connection with his guru, Janardana. Janardana says to him, "Now I will tell you a secret of the spiritual life. The concentrated mind is a key to success in the search for God. For if one cannot focus the mind to accomplish small things, it is utterly incapable of apprehending the infinite." Janardana gave to Eknath, he was quite young there, he gave him the task to keep track of the king's accounts, financial accounts. So every night, Eknath would do the accounting and he would go to sleep if everything was balanced. But one night, there was a difference of 1 rupee and he couldn't figure out what led to it. So he did the counting again, and again 1 rupee was off. And he didn't go to sleep. He kept going and going till the next morning, like 8 o'clock in the morning. He didn't sleep. But finally he found the difference. He found the solution. And Janardana, his guru, came back and found him still in front of the accounting and was surprised to see him there, like obviously not having slept. And Eknath was very happy and said, "I found the problem, I found what was missing." And Janardana was very happy to see Eknath's resolve and said, "Okay, like you're showing the right character, you're showing the right quality, because it's like in these little things, if we get these right, they qualify us for greater things." This is also what Janardana is telling us here. So we have to watch out about these little things. Like I told you earlier about, actually, I spoke about football, and when Guruji was sort of indicating that, criticizing in a way indirectly that if someone like me had the same focus on spirituality as I had on football in the past, I would have been realized by then. And it seems like something innocent, something insignificant that we don't pay too much attention to. But if we let that creep into our life, we lose our focus. We don't even realize it, because little by little, it will undermine and corrupt our resolve to go all the way. Guruji also showed me this once. I've shared this story many times, about a little fish in London in the aquarium that we visited close to 10 years ago, where if that little fish bites you, it has such a poison that it will, unless you cut the finger off within 15 minutes, you will rot from inside. So it's like little things that can spoil our entire spiritual path. So we have to be vigilant, be careful, not to let that happen. Eknath's name, by the way, interestingly also gives a hint at Ek means only or one, and Nath is the Lord. So his focus is only on the Lord. Beautiful name. So we're moving towards the end of the formula. 2 more letters. U stands for you. It's not the Y, but it's often we shorten nowadays you into just you. And that's another very important statement from Guruji, which I feel he's highlighting a lot lately, to remind us that it is very important to be you, to be authentic, to be true to yourself. In our attempt to reach God, ironically, we also have to focus on ourselves. We may sometimes think that that's not okay, that we should forget about ourselves. It's true that that's also a message we hear, that we need to forget about ourselves, but you can only forget about yourself if you have found yourself. So we need to first find ourselves. We need to be who we are, like God's masterpieces. Only then we can make the leap towards Him. And we can only help change other people if we change ourselves. It always goes back to us. And if we don't find happiness inside of ourselves, going back to the F part of the focus, it won't work. It has to work for you. It's really, really important to highlight that. The spiritual ladder that is often referred to, and I'm trying to highlight with this slide here, is individual, actually. It's not that your ladder is not the ladder of somebody else. So this is important to remember. Each one of us is unique, so you can also stand for that uniqueness. We have our own individual journey, our individual adventure called life. And along the way, we need to develop confidence. Very important. Guruji also once told me, I want you to be confident, which sometimes as we sort of try to adapt to the spiritual path, we temporarily may lose confidence, or we may lose our original confidence that we had, but we need to build a new confidence. Very important, and it's not in contradiction to being obedient to the Master, for example, and to do the will of God. It's actually to find a new confidence that is built and based on your soul. And like that, we become the individual masterpieces that God wants us to be. Literally, we are becoming the masterpieces of the Master. As Guruji often highlights, we are not by accident who we are. how God made us is not a mistake. Each one of us is uniquely beautiful, but it's often us who fail to see that, and therefore we undermine that beauty that is there. I also often use this analogy of the labyrinth of Chartres. You may have heard me use that as an analogy of life and the path and how winded it is till we get to that middle point. This is, of course, a particular shape, this labyrinth, so-called labyrinth. It's actually not really a labyrinth because you can't actually get lost. It's similar in life itself. None of us can truly get lost. We just go through we take some side turns, let's say. We go a little bit left, we go a little bit right, but we all sooner or later will reach that center point. And what I'm trying to highlight here is that each flower shape of life that this labyrinth kind of represents will be uniquely different. So in the end, when we have completed our journey, we will leave behind a beautiful story that is unique to each one of us. Our challenges, our struggles, they all contribute to a wonderful divine design that each individual life represents. And finally, service, the S in focus. It's interesting how we get from fun to service. It's action-based. Service is love in action. It's maybe a nicer way to put it, because again, it's one of those terms that we don't associate with something necessarily positive. Like the more you advance on the spiritual path, the more you understand the true meaning of service. But for the average person in the world, service doesn't sound too appealing. It's like, I don't want to be a servant. But if we understand what it truly means, that it is love in action, it's of course a completely different story. But action is the important part. We have to put all these things into action that we mentioned earlier. Without action, no movement, no progress. So it's great to know the goal, but we need to work towards that goal. So Guruji has also stressed that and said, focus is not just to sit there. Look at yourself and grow and transform yourself. This is the whole point. But then Guruji says, but all starts with the joy of life itself. So you see, like, back to the F in the formula, because that's the foundation. You have to enjoy, you have to have that fun of moving towards your goal. And then service becomes a natural expression of your life. You will apply all the things, the knowledge, the talents to help others, to serve others. And in doing so, you will not only help others, but you will help yourself. Because the greatest way to find fulfillment is to make other people happy. And what is interesting, what Guruji highlighted also when he spoke about that happiness is, so for example, if you meditate and you do a spiritual practice, one of them is to meditate, you don't expect the meditation to give you happiness. Interestingly, Guruji turns it on its head and says, no, you have to be happy first and then meditate. Then it works. So it's another reminder that happiness is a choice. We need to decide. Remember choice and character also. Like, choose happiness and then cultivate it. Then build on that. And I can tell you from my personal experience is that I enjoy my service, luckily, let's say. I don't know how I would cope otherwise, but I made my choice earlier in my life, and I'm not saying there are never challenges, but I really truly enjoy doing what I do because I'm convinced, like I've tried to explain to you earlier, that it is for the benefit of humanity, and that gives me fulfillment. And so being active in that way for me is not tiring. God is giving me the energy that I need to keep doing the service. In Bhakti Marga, we have a range of services, let's say, of activities. We call them the 4 arms. You are maybe familiar with them. It's yoga, meditation, knowledge, devotional arts, and rituals. So these are the classical 4 areas of activity. We say activity, but it's actually all service. Servicing yourself and servicing, as a result, others and ultimately humanity. I would say that everything that we do is for the benefit of humanity. And so ultimately it is charity. Because as we transform ourselves, your own transformation becomes a service to humanity. But that's often overlooked. People sometimes think that when, somebody on the spiritual path who works on his own transformation, it's selfish, it's just about that person. But that's not true. If we actually truly change, it becomes a great blessing for our environment, for the people around us. So very important to highlight that also. I added seva because it's not directly mentioned in the 4 arms, but it goes through all the 4 arms in various ways. Seva is selfless service. And I would even add Sangha, that we mentioned earlier as well. That's another way where you can serve the Sangha, contribute to the Sangha, and the Sangha itself becomes a means of service for humanity. And few final thoughts before we end. Being focused is, there's 2 aspects. It can be, it suggests somehow to a narrowness, which can be a positive thing, because you're focused. You ignore certain things that don't belong to your goal, to your focus. But it can also turn into something narrow-minded, which we don't want to become, or even dogmatic, versus an open mind. An open mind, generally, we associate with something positive, but we can be also too open-minded, and then become, undermine our focus. So it's a tricky subject, and each one of us has to find his or her own balance. Here in this context, I wanted to also mention another very important verse of the Bhagavad Gita. The mind is a friend to one who has mastered it, but for one whose mind is uncontrolled, it becomes the worst of enemies. So it's, staying open-minded without losing focus. It's a question of mastering and controlling the mind in the right way also. Finally, how do we lose focus? Krishna gives a warning at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. It says, focusing your mind on me, by my grace, you shall overcome all obstacles. If, however, out of pride you do not listen to me, you will be ruined. So we have to be always vigilant. Guruji, when he introduced the formula during that period, he mentioned also in another satsang that the world is just like a supermarket where there's lots of potential distractions, and it's easy to lose focus. It's easy to get distracted. But if you have a strong relationship with God and Guru, you're fine. There's nothing to worry about. So then he also added that how we surround ourselves with, what association we have. again, going back to Sangha, that helps as a sort of protection shield. And then also be careful what you watch, what you listen to, and what you are doing. Like, just observe yourself, be vigilant. Be careful what you let into your system. So that alertness is something that we should always keep up. And how to guard ourselves? The best way, well, it's to chant the divine name, Guruji said. So this is why it's maybe the key practice that we use to stay focused, to always bring the mind back. And remember, back to God by chanting his name. But remember also what Guruji has said, it's a bit like a naughty child. If you see that your mind is wandering, don't fight it. Be careful, don't fight it, but just bring it back gently, but with determination. That's the way to control your mind. And finally, there can be no realization and no properly focused mind for one who does not engage in this practice. Without such a focused mind, there can be no peace. And without peace, how can there be happiness? So this is Krishna telling Arjuna in chapter 2 about when he says not engaged in this practice, it's about controlling the senses. This is in a section towards the end of chapter 2. And so then he shows the chain reaction of losing. If you don't control your senses, you lose your mind, and then in the end you lose your happiness. It's that chain reaction. But if you control your senses, that's how you can become focused. So keep an eye on what Guruji said. Be watchful. Check where your sight is, what you hear, what you listen, what you do. And finally, all of it, we can, no matter how much effort we make, without the Guru, we're not going to succeed all the way. So Guruji has said, as humans, we can reach the top of the mountain through our own efforts. But to reach the sky, one needs the Satguru. All of this, to close, like I said at the very beginning, leads us back to just love. The journey started with just love, it ends with just love. But I hope that through this formula that Guruji has given us, that this makes now even more sense to us, and we have received precious inspiration of how to actually make just love a reality. So I wish you success in your personal journey, in your personal adventure to reach the goal, and may you become a true masterpiece of our Guru. Jai Gurudev. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Prem se bolo Satgurudeva Sri Swami Vishwananda Mahaprabhu ki Jai.